sure I'll forget it again tonight though.
Hey, Mr. Stiff, I have an interesting proposal for you.
Okay.
If you could go back in time and see any one moment in history, what would it be?
I think moon landing would be pretty cool. But like there.
I feel I just saw you.
I think it would be when the
We've been
famous,
such a long
the
time.
first Loch Ness Monster photo was officially
Mike,
taken.
Yes,
Awesome.
and
Are
the other,
you joining?
and the other mic's coming too.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
she was coming too?
Let me print off a few more copies
Probably
here.
got peeled out too early. It was the fires.
It would either be the first Loch Ness Monster sighting or Noah's Ark. And don't tell me that Noah's Ark didn't happen, because if you do, I will come over there and clobber you. Like you know, some idiot.
Oh, Jacob, we don't need any violence.
Say that Christianity
I was gonna
is.
say, there's no violence in the school.
Yeah, that escalated quickly.
Noah would not approve of violence.
Hey, we saved you a row right up, a chair right up here in the front row.
Hey, this ain't church.
You're used to sitting up front. Come
I'll
on.
sit over here.
Oh.
My back, you know.
There you go.
So make up the last one.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I was worried that only have like worried that no one would show up.
Why is that?
We changed our certain
Because the
recipe
weather is
until
bad?
tonight because voting.
Wow.
I don't think it is, but
Oh, really?
I was having dinner, so.
Oh,
that's my
okay.
excuse. I'm sticking to it.
I was waiting for a quorum to happen at Search and Rescue.
We're not people to show
Here
up.
I am.
All right. So welcome to class 4. First off, does anyone have any questions from the reading?
What does CW mean?
Continuous wave. Fun thing about CW is I built my first Morse key this morning, so now I can actually make the dits and das. If anyone wants to check that out, I can.
Morse code? You can
Yeah.
use Morse code now?
Yeah, because I didn't have a thing to make the like to actually make it work.
Like that?
Yeah.
Like that. I have one. Oh my gosh, how do you spell continuous? I'm drawing.
CONTINOUS.
Yep.
Yep, you've already got one of these.
Could have used you a half an hour ago
Oh, sure.
Yeah, on the other side of
on
town.
the other side of town.
What happened?
We
We
were
needed
one
one more
short.
person.
That was to make a quorum, then we're gonna approve the minute. But no, you didn't.
No.
Does it work?
Yeah.
You didn't know our certain recipe was?
Seems like
No.
it would
Why
fit.
not?
You
Don't
want
you
to
get
get
email?
emails?
Don't you
At
get
the
that?
table at the same
Isn't
level
everybody
as
talking?
the.
Oh, I see.
I don't
You
like
said-
Yeah, almost, but it works.
I did not check my email. That's for.
It's just a broken headphone wire.
Yesterday.
Printed parts.
Yeah, they sent it yesterday. at
Or
11:53
pen
and
hilts.
realized something along those
You
lines.
should have printed this.
That was Tuesday. Normally it's Tuesday. But guess what?
So I have a question. Is the test timed?
Well,
Oh.
no, but we don't want to be here all night. Katie's got to go home at some point.
Is it open book?
No, I wish, but no.
Do you police that?
Yes.
Oh,
Like you're not allowed to have your cell phone out or crib sheets, notes. At any point you look like you're cheating, you can take your test. If you annoy us, actually, we can just take your test and say, thank you, don't be on
Can't you use your calculator in your phone?
No, but I do have a pile of just regular cheapy calculators you can use.
Cool.
Okay.
If we don't pass the test this time, when's the next one?
Well, the Black Hills area, or the Black Hills Amateur Radio Association usually does one every other month. And then the Southern Hills, I'm not sure what that radio club's called. They have one in Hot Springs, the opposite month. So about once a month, but
Okay.
not here.
Give them the opportunity to take another test that same night.
So if you pass this, I think if you don't pass the tech level, then you might just be done. They might have an option of doing it again.
Exactly how a ham radio works.
I'm sorry, Jacob, what were you saying?
Is tech level, we have to describe the operational circuitry and whatnot of the ham radio.
Very basically,
Because
what's
if so,
covered in
I'm
the
gonna
book.
flunk.
Well, the
Like
book
to
is
be
the
there.
study guide for the test,
Have you found?
and what we covered in class.
So will every question be in this book?
No, not every single question. There's 422, 26?
26.
26 questions,
I thought you said
but
465 or something.
Oh, it's 400.
Choose.
but if you check out the website on at the very in the homework, yeah, hand study. That's actually how I passed my general because my tech license, I had a book, I read it, and then I just did the flashcards for my general, and that worked really well. That's because I wasn't planning on doing it until about a week before, and I was just like, flashcards, let's just do this and see how well I do. Because I knew that once I passed my tech, if I passed my tech, it would give me the general, and I was like, I might as well just like not look like a complete idiot. And then they're like, well, here, try the extra, and I'm like, then I look like a complete idiot. Still the next time. Any other questions?
Just don't wanna-
Well, Jacob interrupted and I didn't catch the end of your answer about a chance to take it,
Oh.
another one that same night.
Well,
I would have to check with Tom on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Ed, if you're the easy bake oven gets anywhere, you can just kind of scooch it to the side.
Are you making us dinner?
No, it's for lab assays.
Cooking frogs?
So any other questions regarding the reading for tonight, last night, anything we've covered so far?
Can you give me a guest pass so I can read it online?
Yes. Oh, I don't have a guest pass,
Okay.
but I do. Sorry, I don't have the powers to be. Do not allow me to give out guest passwords, or else I totally would. A lot more often.
I understand last week you guys took a practice test.
Yes.
Would there be a possibility for somebody that wasn't there getting one so I can try it at home?
I may still have a copy or
It's not
two.
that important, but.
Well, I have the key.
It's got all the answers checked on it, and you can see all the answers I got wrong on it, but it's not,
How many did you get right?
not many.
Well, see.
I don't think I
wanna show you
have.
up. Wow.
No, I-
Okay. I don't have another copy, but I can print you off a copy if you remind me at the end of class.
No
I
big
need
deal,
your-
no big deal. I just
Okay.
thought it'd be.
It was just I went to.
I got 24 on 24.
Oh, what's the website there? I went to hamexam.org, just printed off a randomly generated test. And then at hamstudy.org also gives you randomly generated.
That's all in your, drop downs out of your book that you handed out the other day, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then at the very last slide here, which oddly enough is on its own page, talks about going to hamstudy.org.
Yeah, stop.
And that I highly recommend.
But that's great.
I've never counted how many of your questions are in this book.
I haven't counted them either. And so there are a lot of questions that are
See what I can do.
the same question, just worded differently. So like the frequency one, as long as you get your frequency equation down, like then they'll ask you like 10 different questions about frequency and how to calculate it. And like here, it's a wavelength in meters, calculate the frequency.
And here I kind of did pretty bad.
Oh, that was me.
Okay, one last question on my end.
Okay,
The 19th, I'm not in town. I'm gone.
okay.
So when would be the next time I can test? I
So
know somebody brought that up a little bit earlier, but just.
So the ARRL website, American Radio Relay League, so it's ARRL.org, has test locations and dates. So if you're not, we're not like registered with them, because I didn't plan like that far ahead. But otherwise, any other tests, like so anything that the Black Hills Amateur Radio Club or the Northeast Wyoming Amateur Radio Association puts on, they'll notify them. And so you can search for upcoming tests there. So Hot Springs, Rapid City, or Gillette usually have a test every month or so.
Okay, that's ARRL.
Yeah.
Oh,
Any other questions? Alrighty. So, I am me, you are you. Here's our schedule. Next Monday, we're starting at 7 again, and that will be our last formal class. Then on the 19th, we're gonna have our exam session. I was gonna the 19th of November.
Oh,
So the next week, so this is the 5th. Next Monday's the 12th, and the following Monday's the 19th. And this 7 o'clock, I'm gonna talk with Tom. I was hoping to talk to him tonight, but Katie Allen from Sundance was gonna come down and meet with us. I need to make sure that that time works. I will definitely let you guys know if something changes from that 7 o'clock time. We've covered that before. So tonight we're going to cover amateur radio practices and station setup and some station equipment, which is why I have some station equipment here to show you. So one thing when you're selecting your equipment is ask other people that might have had their hands on this equipment before. So we call those people Elmers. I'm not quite sure what the Elmer part is really about, but it is Elmer. Like Elmer Fudd. Yeah, or Elmer's Glue. Like it is an experienced ham radio operator. Maybe Elmer, is there like a pig? Like on the glue, is that pig's name Elmer?
Elmer's glue has got a cow.
it's
Oh,
a
it's
cow. It's not.
Okay, I was just trying to find
Well,
some.
actually, it's a bowl.
True.
Well,
Big, thick,
Go
heavy
by.
horns.
anyway, so really what you want to know or talk about is what do I want to accomplish? So if I want something that I can put in my pocket and talk to guys in the neighboring area, that's one thing. If I want to talk to people in Georgia, that's a different thing. You know, if I want something in my
You could bounce it
car,
off a satellite then.
satellite's different. If I want something for my car, every situation is going to have different station requirements. So usually asking somebody what they would recommend is probably a good start. You'll probably get a lot of different opinions on what equipment is the best. There's people that say the big three are the important ones. I just go with whatever works. So like most people are going to start off with these, fairly inexpensive Baofeng radios. I guess the FCC's outlawing these, so I don't know if this is one to recommend necessarily anymore, but
They're gonna outlaw 'em?
I think there's something about an import ban because these are able to transmit outside the ham radio frequencies.
Yes, they are.
So I can go anywhere from like
Oh, no.
136 to 174 megahertz.
170 different channels. We use them for circulation.
Well, yeah. So like, I kind of like it because it's like if I'm lost somewhere and I want to talk to the national park people that are nearby me in the 170s, I can get help. But the FCC doesn't really like that, being able to transmit outside the band because people
So they
don't
would
stay in their band.
rather people just die out there.
Yeah, the FCC does not care about people outside of cell phone service.
Because that's kind of why I have mine. Short search and rescue. It goes in my pack in case you break a leg. You
Yeah,
can't get anywhere, like, with your radio.
it is kind of nice having that broader experience, but at least receiving, like most radios will receive outside of the bands so you can listen to stuff, but transmitting it locks it into the ham radio frequencies that you're allotted to.
Okay, so do we know when that ban is going to go into effect, or if it's already? in
It's
effect?
kind of up in the air. So
Yeah.
So in other words, order one before they do it.
that's kind of what I was thinking. Like on Amazon, they're like $25.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you serious?
Yeah, they're like super cheap. This
Yeah.
one,
But
Like-
then I bought my first one for 65 and my second one was like $40.
yeah, like this battery's this super extended battery is like $10.
So
So
I got mine for
Play with the
15.
charger and a little ear thing.
yeah, they're ridiculously cheap.
Yeah.
If you get one of the handheld radios from like
Why is
the
that one so expensive?
if you get like a radio from one of the big threes, like you're spending like a few $100s minimum. This one inexpensive, and it's a great starter radio because if you break it, you don't feel so bad. If you break a few $100 piece of equipment, you'll feel really bad. So like these things, I guess if you drop them, you can like mess up their crystals in there so that they won't generate the proper frequency. If that happens, yeah, and they have a crystal oscillator inside to generate a frequency. If that happens, or yeah, if it gets submerged, you buy a new one, really.
Or you can put it in rice and the rice will absorb all the moisture.
As long as it hasn't fried it, yeah. So in your radio station, there's a plethora of things that you can have. We'll talk about a bunch of the different parts and pieces, but one of the things that a lot of people are like more modern stations are going to use is a computer. And so I have to see what you guys are looking at. Thanks for distracting the class, Ed.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'd like to buy one of them radios.
Oh, is this? Oh yeah, so this is the 8-watt version, which is the one I'm touching or holding up right now.
And you
I
got
do-
that for what?
No, this. So the UV5R is the 5-watt version of
Okay.
that, so it's like $25. This one is the BFF8HP, which is the one you just showed him.
Okay.
I also have the tri-band one personally. So this one's for the high school radio club that I bought. But I also have a tri-band one personally, which is about that same price. But it also has the 1.25 meter built in.
So the F5 version is cheaper?
Yeah, the
But it's
UV5R is like $25.
That's 5 watts. That has a variable. That's a 3 to 8 watt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that
Yes.
this one is definitely like, it's also very good. So like all these Baofeng radios, like you spend, $60 on one, you'll probably be happy with it. $25, you'll spend some on doing some upgrades, but then you'll be happy with it. And then once someone starts off, you'd be like, here's my old radio. It's a loaner. Go for it, because then you won't be super attached to it. But yeah, I like those radios. Legally, I don't know if I can advocate for you to totally go and buy one because of the maybe ban thing going on.
It ain't illegal until it's bad.
Yeah.
That's
So
true.
caveat emptor, figure it out.
Even after they ban it, they can't come and say, hey,
I want to know.
no, they can't do anything about it. Yeah.
You just can't talk on it. You can listen.
They just,
Well, as long as you're not talking outside your band, you're not raising any red flags. So
Yeah.
whatever.
Talking outside your band with.
Like this can go outside of the ham radio bands.
I'll just use
So
somebody else's call sign.
oh yeah, just do that. That's totally not against the rules. just not against it, my lord. But yeah, and then I went when I first hung out with an Elmer. I had one of these Baofeng radios. He's like, "Yeah, those aren't the greatest. You'll want to upgrade at some point." So you get a little derision from some of the experienced hams with the deep pockets that can spend $400 on a handheld. But I will say, check out Craigslist. Check out if you go to ham get-togethers, people sell out their old handhelds because they collect them like crazy, and so they'll sell out their old ones. And you can probably get a pretty good deal. So I will say I bought a nice Yaesu one off Craigslist for $100, and I'm happy with it. I haven't dropped it though. So, Jacob,
If there was if my mom had say a police scanner type looking radio, and the only thing that wasn't apparently working on it was the power cord, which was kind of screwed up, how would we fix that?
I would have to have eyes on it to check it out.
Okay.
Yeah. So with your computer, with your ham radio station, and your cell phone is starting to get smartphones are starting to get into this realm too, but using them for logging. So when you make contacts, a lot of ham radio operators keep an actual notebook. I like the notebook because I can't type and do the keys and stuff like that. I can barely write down stuff as fast as I hear it. So logging stuff, you can also use it to keep tabs on, like, not keep tabs. Logging, lookup. Okay, so logging, and then you can also look up, so that QRZ website I was talking about earlier, like, you can just search for somebody's call sign and it'll tell you who they are. And then that way you can like say, oh, who am I talking to? Oh, it's Charlie or John or something like that. And then you can also use your computer sound card to generate and decode CW. So if you don't want to learn how to do Morse code, you can use your computer to do it. And you just like type, send, it'll receive, it'll decode it, and you type, send, kind of like a chat room. And then you can also do that with digital signals. So like last time I was talking about like PSK31, FT8, you use your computer hooked up to usually a USB cable or a terminal node controller, and then it hooks up to your radio, and then it starts broadcasting signals that way, which is pretty cool. I said that already. Power supplies. So we covered batteries in week 1. So we talked about the different types of batteries, some battery safety when we talked about electrical safety. So we're going to go on to actual power supplies. And so power supply, if it wasn't wired into my cabinet, I would show you, but this little doohickey on the bottom converts, oh, sorry. The doohickey looks like that on the bottom. It's got the 2 little dials, needles. No, just this one. Just this little part.
Oh, you're talking
This is a
about
tuner
that.
there. Yeah. So the thing on the bottom, all it does, its only job is to take the 110 volts AC that's coming out of the wall and convert it to 13.8 volts DC. And 13.8 volts is like the sweet spot for amateur radio equipment. So like when you do a mobile install,
13.8 volts.
13.8 volts. And so when you install like a radio in your car has a 12 volt battery, but really it's running like between 9 volts and 14, depending on the drain, how your alternator's running. And so it's actually like most radios are rated to run 13.8 volts plus or minus 15%. So it's got like a range from like 11-ish to 14-ish. If I did the math right in my head. So your alternator can also be a source of problem. So your alternator is just this dynamo running inside your engine, and
That keeps recharging the battery after you've used energy.
yes, and
Because
so
it
that
rotates off of the
engine there.
centrifuge that goes to the back of the wheels.
And so one thing about alternators is they generate radio frequency interference. So they generate RFI. And so that will actually cause, I don't know if you guys have heard in your radio, like your regular car stereos, but you could hear that whining, especially when you transmit.
You said generator, and before you said alternator, so which one is it? Or both?
Sorry, it is an alternator,
Okay,
but an alternator is used to generate,
understand,
yes,
but there's a big difference between the two.
yes, my bad.
One's in a car, one's not.
No, they both can be in the car. Depending on how old, depending on how old it is.
Back in the day, it's all they had was a generator.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Way before you did.
So, so power supply. So PSU stands for power supply units, and like I said, they convert AC to DC of a proper specification, and they also use large wires to decrease loss. So if you have a skinny wire, like a 22 gauge wire, which is fairly skinny for radio applications, like that thing's gonna it's gonna be like trying to take what would normally go in a fire hose and put it in a garden hose. Like you're just trying to shove so much current through there. That's not cool. A lot of electromotive force because of high voltage. That thing's gonna get hot and melt, and you'll have a lot of smoke and stuff. And then you'll have a wire that doesn't work. But if you have a heavier gauge wire, it's able to take that load without generating a lot of excess heat and losing that. So we call that loss. And with mobile units, you also want to ground your radio. So having like a grounding strap to the engine or frame of your car, that's kind of important too. But yeah, the alternators, the whining can actually, so that radio frequency interference can be mitigated through the use of ferrite chokes, which we'll talk about in a few slides when we talk about being a good neighbor. But yeah, so when I first got my Baofeng radio, I got one that's, it's called a battery eliminator, so it just slides out, you stick it in here, and then it has a cigarette lighter, so it's not actually a battery, it just runs straight off the car battery. I thought it was slick, and then I heard my alternator sound, it was super annoying, and every time I like hit the accelerator, it started making the whine, and I let off, and so I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Then I sold it.
My
Can you
mom's
put a
car
fair
doesn't
ID
do
on it?
that ever. The annoying thing is that when you plug in a certain, that when you plug in the phone charger, the radio goes crazy.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other things in your car that, I mean, there's fans and all sorts of stuff in your car. The blower motor can also cause radio frequency interference. So there's a lot of stuff inside your car that can cause problems, which adds more fun to mobile operating. And I think we were saying something.
Could you just add a fair ID on it, on your line, and they'll choke it?
That was before I exactly knew what Fair IDs
Okay.
were, so I never tried it.
Okay.
So that would be something that's interesting. So one thing, I do have a student that's using one of these battery eliminators, but is using it with a battery pack. So that one, it doesn't have that annoying whine sound, but maybe I could borrow it and just run it in my car. So now we're going to talk about, the next couple slides are going to talk mainly about base stations and parts and pieces of those base stations. These are special features. They will encompass like one question each on the test out of the 426. So it's not likely you'll run into them, but just because we want to cover our bases, we're going to talk about them. So on your radio, there's something called a noise blanker. And there's actually a lot of different buttons. So like this one that we have, this base station, I can add like a noise blanket, noise reducer, notch settings, preamps, all that stuff. We really aren't going to get too deep into that. And really until you get into like the general where you learn about like you're doing voice on high frequencies, you're not really going to need to know about that. And it's really the best way to do it is to sit with the antenna set up with someone who knows what they're doing next to you and help tune the radio, play with stuff. But I just want to tell you about the concepts behind it, and then we can, if you have any questions or want some like try to play with this at a later date, we can do that. So a noise blanker like takes care of some of this unwanted interference. So like ignition sounds, so like when you're in your car and you turn on your ignition, that causes some radio frequency interference. And so there's actually a setting on your radio that acts kind of like a Faraday beat. So it brings in those weird pulses and kind of cancels them out. Because they're like, this isn't coming from the microphone, this isn't coming from like outside sources. We want to try to just eliminate that. It does a halfway decent job of that. Gain. So gain is used in a few different contexts in ham radio. So we talked about like directional antennas and having gain in that area. So gain in this sense, it talks about microphone gain. And so when you talk, you have inflections and highs and lows in your voice. And so with your gain settings, bless you, you can actually turn up the gain on your radio and it brings all the levels up equally. So the highs just get thrown off the chart and become super distorted. The mediums are a little bit louder and then the lows are a little bit louder too, but it can cause over distortion. And so I was reading up on this and they recommend like, really if you're using gain over like 30%, you're way overdoing it. So it's just like, it's like if I wanted stronger coffee, I just need to know how to brew it right. But if I just put it in and I brew it for so long, I just get this really icky stuff. So if anyone here's a coffee snob, you know what I'm talking about. So with that, you want to like play with the settings so that you can hear yourself, or like when you're being heard, it's not over distorted. It's the same way as if, I've got this little bitty microphone here, actually it's up here on the side. you know, if I'm talking to it, and you know, you want to hold it a few inches from your face. But if I'm talking to it right here,
You're
it's
getting
gonna sound really bad. So overuse of the gain, not good. Then you have the tool used to select your frequency. So this radio has this nice big variable frequency oscillator. It's the fun knob that's fun to spin. Like, I just love doing this all the time. And so other radios, like here, we have a keypad to enter in my frequencies I want to go to. Sometimes it's just hitting the up or down arrow as well. So this one on the mic has an up and down button, so I can just go up, you know, like 5 megahertz or something like that. And so those are how we select our frequency so that we can use the frequency. There is a memory, so with especially with handhelds, like, you know, I turned it on and it tells me that I'm on the national calling frequency. I can go through, you know, I've got a bunch of repeaters programmed in here. So I've got Pisgah, the one in Rapid City, the one over by Laramie. And so having those frequencies in there is super nice because then it also has my CTSS tone. It's got all the different things. So I need to, if I'm, you know, near Pisgah, I can just go to Pisgah. I don't need to put in my offset, which I think I talk about that. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. I don't need to put in the tone. I just say go to Pisgah. It knows my frequency. It knows my offset. It knows what direction the offset is. And so it just makes it really nice. So storing those things in frequency is really good. If you guys happen to get one of these radios, I have a lot of really good preloaded settings. If you want to just like drop it by, I've got the cord, plug it in, give me 5 seconds, and you'll have lots of good repeaters and frequencies to use. Scanning. So scanning is also nice. On these Baofeng radios, so some radios it just says, you know, go to 2 meters, scan. This one you can specifically say, I want to scan from 136 to 140 and megahertz, and then it'll scan in that zone. So I found that's kind of nice in here if I'm listening for something in particular. Complete band, well, okay. So squelch. This is why I brought this one up here. So this is an antique. This is from the late 70s, early 80s. It's a 2 meter, 25 watt transceiver. It's kind of cool because it's got like the external PL tone board. It also has like, this is how you switch your frequencies. So this changes kilohertz, 10 kilohertz. This one's 100 kilohertz, and that's where it gets obnoxious. And so this, and then you can also change your offsets. It also gets a lot of radio frequency interference because I'm moving it. So one thing that's really nice about is that it's got a squelch option here. So I can, you know, turn my volume up, and of course it's under now that I've played with it. Okay, I have to move it away from something. It's totally worked earlier, so of course it's not going to work now. Okay, well, sorry, I totally expected to show you. So over here is the squelch knob, and so that all that gravelly sound in the background, you can actually get rid of that by decreasing the sensitivity of your radio. So then I turn it up until I can't hear that gravelly sound, and then transmissions, which will be at a higher level, will come into the radio, and I will actually hear them instead of all that static. Jacob.
If that's an antique, then it was probably used in one of the older wars like World War I, II.
No, those happened in the 19-teens and 1940s. This is from the 1970s and 80s. Memory scan, squelch, and so we'll talk about sensitivity and selectivity on the next side. And then your repeater offset. So this sweet little switch here is how you set your repeater offset. But the repeater offset, is, so repeaters aren't gonna talk on top of each other with their frequencies. So if I was talking to Ed, either Ed, on a frequency, and it's supposed to go to a repeater 10 miles away, get amplified, and then transmit it all over the place, he would hear me twice. Or my signal would go to him directly through what we would call simplex, and then it would also come back to him from the repeater. That's not really cool. So what will happen is I will transmit on one frequency, the repeater will shift that frequency up or down by like 0.6 megahertz, and then we'll transmit it out so that Ed's listening on, for Mount Pisgah, 147 or 147.3 megahertz. But I'm actually transmitting on 147.9. It's bouncing up to Pisgah, dropping down to 3, and then going to Ed. So it's not, he's not getting two signals. You know, I'm not double speaking, I guess. It's just going there, being amplified, and being spread out on a slightly different frequency, because he's not listening on 147.9. He's listening on 147.3 because that's what everybody else in the area is listening on. So repeater offset is important. In 2 meter band, which is the VHF stuff, it's 0.6 megahertz offset. So that's at the bottom of whatever page number this is. And then on the UHF frequencies, it's 5 megahertz. So they actually jump it up a lot higher or drop it down a lot lower. And so this is an offset. So it's just the difference between the receiving and transmitting frequencies. And so that's really important when you're talking about repeater operation. If I'm talking to Ed directly, you know, we'll just go simplex. So we don't have to change frequencies. My radio is transmitting on the same frequency that he's transmitting to me. So it's like walkie-talkies. So the repeater can also be positive or negative offset. So it can jump up like 600 megahertz or 0.6 megahertz, or it can jump down 0.6 megahertz. And then on UHF, it can jump up 5 megahertz or jump down 5 megahertz. Any questions on that part?
How do you handle, like you're talking at a certain frequency,
Yeah.
okay? In this area, we can all agree that that frequency is fine to talk.
Okay.
Because it's not hitting a repeater, it's just going, what did you call it, simplex?
Yeah.
Okay. What if you want to talk to somebody out of state, way on the other side of the country, okay? And you're speaking in this frequency, bouncing it up a bunch of repeaters or a satellite or the moon. They get it over there, but it's hitting something else that you didn't know was a repeater or.
So there are a lot of rules and guidelines to that, and so each state and region has what they call repeater coordinators, and so there are people that designate these are the repeater frequencies, and so they let people know. They publish a repeater book, and so they let people know that these are
the book.
Well, or get the app. Repeater book has an app too.
Nice.
And so, like, if I'm talking to a satellite and I'm talking to like SO50, which is one of my favorite satellites to talk to, you know, its downlink frequency is not something that anybody else uses in their repeaters.
Does the actual satellite talk back or
People talk back. Now, the satellite doesn't say anything. But another interesting thing is there are actually national calling frequencies on both UHF and VHF frequencies, which are ones that so those are completely open, no repeaters are on those channels. And so those are only for simplex. And so if you're driving anywhere in the United States and you call CQ, which is calling anybody who wants to talk to me, somebody will reply. So when I drove to Helena this summer, you know, I was calling CQ on the national calling frequency because I was bored and I didn't have any repeater in the area programmed in my radio. And programming your repeaters and driving at the same time is just as bad as texting and driving, if not worse. So I'm just calling on the national calling frequency, and I hear a guy. So I'm down by the bread company place by the interstate as I turn off to go to Helena, and I'm talking to him for like 50 miles until I get into Helena, and he's actually in Helena. But yeah, so there are people that listen to the national calling frequency, and there are a lot of people that, as they're traveling across, that's their party band. So anybody can jump in on that and talk. Well, I mean, any ham radio operator can jump in on that and talk to people there. So there are a lot of people that say, "Hey, I'm listening on this frequency," and if you want, I will program that into your radio if you go.
I was just thinking of the CD bands.
I think that's channel 8 is the party band.
Well, I was thinking of them because I used to actually run the CD all the time in the 90s, all the way through to, well, when I moved to Wyoming, I took it out. But I was just thinking of that when you were talking about that. That's all.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
So can you download this book?
The repeater book?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a. Well, I mean, I don't know if you can download the book.
Is
But,
it
like,
PDF?
Yeah, I don't know if you can download the book as a PDF, but the app is something that I download and have on my phone. So when I went to Baltimore, took my radio, I was scanning some stuff, but I was also programmed into specific repeaters in the area. It's dead over there. But anyway, I tried calling people on those repeaters and see what's up. Nobody talked to me. Nobody liked me. Maybe they were busy. When I went to State Science Fair in March, I talked to some people on those local repeaters, which are why those are so low on my list, is because I was one of the first ones I added on. So they have a pretty active club down at the university. They're friendly. Any questions before we move on? Okay, more base station fun stuff. So if you get a signal in and somebody sounds like way too high or way too low, and you don't think that you're talking to Barry Manilow or Alvin and the Chipmunks, like, you can actually change their tuning a little bit. And they call that receiver incremental tuning, RIT. And so you can actually take their frequency if they're way too high or high pitched, you can tune it down a little bit. But, if you don't realize that the ham radio operator you're talking to is like 12, you might think, oh, that's way too high, and you might want to tone it down a little bit. That doesn't really change your transmission. It just augments the tone of the voice of the person that you're talking to. Because sometimes it's just hard, like some people are hard of hearing in the high registers and low registers, so you can actually bring that to, somewhere where you're more comfortable listening to them, or they're less obnoxious.
So do most radios have a button for that?
Most modern base stations do. So like this one, no. This one, yeah, it's this little, like, you just push this, because this is like a button knob, so you push that, and then you just change it up a little bit.
Okay, what about their little portable?
This one, no. So we're talking about like
More base
fancier
okay,
base
got it,
station-y
got
type
it.
things.
It does say base station, sorry.
Yeah. And so all of this stuff, except for the push to talk, is all base station-y stuff. Base stations and handhelds have the push to talk. Some phones still have the push to talk. I know, like, Motorola was really big into that, or Boost Mobile was really big into that for a while. But automatic gain control. So automatic gain control is this fun feature where so we were talking about gain earlier, where you cranking up your gain too high is really bad, causes over distortion. Well, it uses the processor inside the radio to augment that a little bit and say, okay, well, you're a little quiet here because you're a little far away from the radio, and as you move or change positions, it can actually automatically change your gain a little bit on the microphone. But also, it can also change the gain on your receiver, because as radio waves hit the ionosphere, like we talked about in whatever week, they become elliptically polarized, and you can, due to whatever fluctuations, their signal can come in, fade, go out. And so instead of you trying to turn up and down your volume as their signal comes in and out, you can actually tell your radio, just keep a tab on this, and it will actually change how much you're gaining from the antenna side of things to move back and forth with their signal. So what you hear out of your audio is a fairly consistent QSO or conversation. So back in your CB days, like if you're listening to like a skip from like Alabama or something like that, like sometimes it fades, it goes in and out just because there might be a thunderstorm in Missouri. And that's why it sounds weird to us up here. So atmospheric interference is one of the biggest problems with HF, but having like automatic gain control, which is just this button that says AFG or AGF. Wow, AGC, whatever. I am need my own coffee.
It's a Monday.
It will actually kind of try to keep that consistent so you can like talk to somebody. Filters. So filters can actually change how big a chunk of bandwidth are you trying to listen in on. So if everybody in this room is talking at once and I'm trying to listen for Ed, it makes it really hard when everyone's talking, there's a lot of extra noise, and I'm talking to Ed. But what I can do is I can put in a filter to get a lot less people. So I clear you guys out and I clear you guys out so I can hear a little bit of noise, but I can hear Ed a lot better. That's what a filter is all about, is decreasing the size of your filter or your bandwidth window to then I can hear him so much better. And you can actually filter it down. So single sideband, they like to estimate it's about 3,000 kilohertz, your signal. And you don't necessarily need all the highs and all the lows. But if I can narrow it down to about 2.4 kilohertz, 2,400 kilohertz, then I might chop off a little bit of this high, a little bit of this low, but I can hear him so much better because I've gotten rid of all the extra noise. Yeah, so that's really important. So there's a couple questions on there. Number one is about CW. So if you're trying to send Morse code to people, it actually asks what's the best filter. So it gives you the choice of like 5,000 kilohertz to 500 kilohertz. And since the bandwidth that we talked about for a CW QSO is about 150 hertz, you want to go down to the 500 hertz. And that's just a question that's on the test. I would really say like go down to like 200 hertz, but that's not a normal setting. Single sideband, a 2,400 kilohertz filter is usually best. And I think I might have the thing about CW. No, I don't. So those are so filters are nice because when I first turn on my radio, I've got like, 5 megahertz, maybe 500 kilohertz. So, or 5,000 kilohertz. So I've got this super wide chunk, a window of bandwidth. So I'm just kind of listening. And so I can I hear something over here. So I can begin narrowing my filter so that I can actually hear what that is. So then I can actually talk to those people that are way off yonder. Questions on that? All right, so more station equipment. So there are not really anymore, but you might find them in some more boutique ham radios equipment places. There are dedicated transmitters. So a lot of the older stuff that you find, like I'm talking about like tube older stuff, there are just transmitters. They don't receive any signal. Then you would have a second base station next to it that would only be a receiver. So you transmit on one machine completely, receive on another machine completely. And that was just the way it was. Then we got into transceivers. And so that is your transmitter and receiver in the same box. So this thing is a transceiver. This thing's a transceiver. This thing's a transceiver. And so that made it really nice so I didn't have to have two separate radios, one to transmit, one to receive. A lot of people called HT. So they refer to those things that you put in your pocket as HTs. Those are handheld transceivers. But a lot of people like to call them handy talkies because it's like a walkie-talkie, a handy talkie. But I always like to call it the handheld transceiver because that's what it is. Transmits and receives and is handheld. This is handheld, but to a lesser degree.
Yeah, that thing is more like part of your backpack.
Yes. So one other thing, I think this is might be the last piece of station equipment, is an RF power amplifier. I don't have one, but you can get RF power amplifiers that take, this station goes to a max of 100 watts, this 25 watts, this 8 watts. They do have some limitations. You can actually get amplifiers that go up to like 1.5 kilowatts.
Whoa.
So that's just upstairs, people. So you can actually like put out and like it will take this signal coming from this 100-watt transceiver and pump it up so that it will talk to, if I want to talk to the people on the surface of the moon, I could do that. There are a lot of different classes. There's like class A, B, C, and D. They do different things with phases of the waves. You definitely don't need to know anything about that until much later. But it's cool because you can increase the power output from your station. There is, so I was looking at this, Baofeng makes a tiny one that boosts this signal to a 45-watt signal. I mean, it looks like this and you would mount it in your car or something, but that's something that is a possibility.
Is that legal?
Yeah, so you can have up to like 50 watts on 2 meter. So this thing will pump out 50 watts on 2 meter. This will pump out 25 watts. This thing with that booster could do that. So it just pushes your signal out a little bit further so you can try to get a more clear signal or a further connection. Bless you.
Thank you.
So those are kind of cool. There are, like, if you look at the gigantic directional antennas that some people have, like they have giant boosters. They're not running 100 watts. They're running, 1,000 watts, or you can get like a 600-watt booster. They also are kind of expensive, generate a lot of heat. They also, take up a lot of power. They are a whole different consideration of their own. Never mind. This is important. So this is what I was telling you. I was going to talk about sensitivity versus selectivity. So sensitivity is, can I hear it? I drop a pin across the room. Could I hear it? If so, I have a high sensitivity for my reception. If I can hear a signal, like if I can just hear somebody talking, I might not be able to make out what they say, but it's sensitive enough to hear that something's going on there, we're talking about sensitivity. But if this whole class is talking and I want to hear what Allie's saying, then that is selectivity. So being able to select or discriminate between all the different signals that are going on, that's important. So when you get into like contesting, they have what's known as like pileups. So we'll have, 5 different people are trying to contact one station at a time. Being able to select out one person and say, okay, you go ahead, then you go ahead, then you go ahead, that makes things a lot easier trying to manage that conversation. And then first off, if you can't hear the signal, well, that's hard to select out of the signals that come in. So then you can also talk about preamplifiers. So that goes between the antenna, so the receiving end, and the station. So it actually takes a really faint signal, boosts it up, and then so it kind of like tries to cut the noise, boosts the little peaks, the signals, and then bring it to your station so that your station can then process and hopefully transmit what the signal actually is. Mixers. So mixers, oscillators, and modulation. You really just need to know the basic of a mixer converts radio frequencies from one frequency to another. An oscillator will generate a specific frequency, and then a modulation is actually combining speech with an RF carrier signal. So like frequency modulation or amplitude modulation. So stuff we kind of talked about last time. I mentioned the mixer, oscillator, and modulation because those are like each one random question out of the 426, but it's good to just kind of know those words. And so these are the mixer and oscillator, or how, even in their handheld transceivers, how that signal is created. So when I push the button and I talk into it, it actually generates the signals and begins putting my my voice into that mixer and then modulates it and sends it out. And using that oscillator, it can actually put it at a specific frequency. So it can talk at the natural calling frequency or, you know, whatever frequency scheduled. Any questions over those? Okay. Okay, common problems. One of the most common problems with ham radio anything is user error. So most of the time the station equipment is doing what it should. You set something up wrong, there's a setting that's wrong, you're pushing. I did have a student one time that was trying to push this instead of the button that's the push to talk. This is just a cover that covers the speaker jack. So there are different things that when you're getting to the troubleshooting stage, if you don't know how to run this thing or need some help, YouTube's your friend. Reading the manual or asking somebody who might have some experience with this equipment, very useful. So when I did my tech and general license, I didn't really know any of the other hands in the area. I knew Mr. Clinker from just family friend from long ago. I learned all this stuff on my own. Then I went and hung out with him for like 2 hours and learned so much more than what I had learned just reading books and going through flashcards and stuff like that. So finding somebody that knows what they're doing, really helpful. So interference. So there's 3 big categories of interference. So there's fundamental interference, where it doesn't even necessarily have to be on the same frequency. If you have a really powerful transmitter nearby, your equipment will not work very well. So you turn on your radio, and let's say I have these ballasts in this room. They're not even super strong, but if I turn on my radio, I hear the hum of the ballast of the fluorescent lights. It's obnoxious. So that's just a fundamental overload because I have a fairly strong radio frequency interference source nearby. It's picking it up. Another thing is harmonics. So if I'm transmitting on 40 meters, I'm actually generating harmonics on 20 meters and 10 meters. So if you can divide it by 2, that's the different harmonics that could be generating with your radio wave transmission. Sometimes those harmonics can interact, and if you have 2 frequencies interact, it actually causes different orders of what's the word? Anyway, different order of harmonics, so that you have frequency 1, frequency 2, the sum of the frequencies, and then the difference. So when 2 radio frequencies interact, you actually get 4 frequencies out of that. You really don't need to know that, other than it's a type of interference. And then spurious emissions are, if your transceiver is broken, like I drop this and it's stuck on transmit, that would be a spurious emission. So it's designed to transmit. So it's not like a doorbell that's popping up on someone's transceiver, but it's designed to transmit. It's just doing that wrong. Or my oscillator is broken and I'm transmitting on actually like a frequency down or something. So interference can cause problems for you. It can also cause problems for other people. So, sorry, my throat's dry. So your if you're running UHF and VHF, that's similar to frequencies that people use for their, if they have rabbit ear antennas on their TV, you can
Rabbit
cause
ear? Oh.
antennas on their TV. That can cause problems for them. It can cause all sorts of random issues for stereo equipment, and sometimes it's not necessarily those, it's not necessarily the little FM antenna that's picking up the signal. It could be the power cords or the long speaker lines that are picking up the signal, and it's interacting with the equipment itself. So that can be a problem. And so if you have a neighbor that calls you up and says, hey, you're talking on my, radio, please stop. Well, first off, you should stop transmitting until you figure out what the problem, like how this is, what's going on. If you have a similar radio, maybe you could just say, okay, let me run some tests. Here, if you can, figure out if you're actually causing the problem. If you're causing the problem, well, we've narrowed down the source of it, now we can work on fixing it. I just read listened to a podcast where a CBer down the street was using an illegal linear amplifier, and so she was like, the neighbor was like, you're transmitting on my TV or something. And so he turned off his station, went to his neighbor's house, and it was still going. He's like, well, this isn't me because I'm not at my station. And so he was able to track down the source of the problem and was able to fix it. So one thing that is really nice is to help your neighbor, if they're willing, to help troubleshoot the problem so that your transmissions don't interfere with their TV, stereo, whatever. And so one thing that's really nice are RF chokes. So ferrite chokes. So like those ferrite beads you were talking about, like I usually have like a dozen of them sitting around. But this, usually I have a USB cable or something with them on it. Okay, well here's one. So this right here, this odd bulky thing on this cable is actually a ferrite choke. If I cracked it open, it's actually like the wire goes in and loops through, sometimes once, sometimes multiple times, and then just passes through. And you're like, that didn't do anything. It does, because this long, when it's undone, this long piece of cord will interact with radio frequencies and sometimes microwave frequencies. Just it will interact because it's a copper wire. It will just do that. If I just strung out a long piece of copper wire and hooked it up to my radio, it becomes an antenna. Like it just does. So this is acting like a mini antenna, and this ferrite choke here removes that from the outside of the cable. And so what you can do, they have, you can go buy big bags of Snap-on ferrite chokes for fairly inexpensive, and you can help the neighbor troubleshoot or your own stuff. Like if every time you transmit, your garage door opens, you can put a ferrite choke on your antenna for your garage door. So you can make that work. So ferrite chokes are really useful for getting rid of this unwanted interference. And whenever it pops up, you can put another ferrite bead on them. But yeah, help them find a solution. Sometimes it's even just tightening connections to their radio equipment, TV equipment. So one other thing is Part 15 devices. So these are devices that can generate radio wave interference, but are not designed to be transmitters. So those are unlicensed devices that, like a doorbell. So it's designed to transmit from your door to the bell.
From the button to the thing inside your house that goes
Yeah.
ding dong.
So wireless doorbell. It's supposed to have a very limited range, but you don't need a license. You don't need a ham radio license or any special license to have one. Those can cause problems with your station. And so those ones, they call them Part 15 devices. There's not a whole lot you can do about it other than just tell your neighbor, because due to FCC rules, this thing is causing harmful radio interference. Please stop using it. And if they say, no, I'm just going to keep using it, maybe a nice Christmas gift. If some vandals break their existing doorbell and you have a Christmas gift of here's a new doorbell, I don't know.
Sounds like you've done that.
It's just a thing. Just a thing, We live in a very rough neighborhood.
People in my neighborhood are mostly old people.
So maintain your equipment. So I think this might be my last slide, besides the study form. So maintain your equipment, is important. Don't get it wet. Don't feed it after midnight. Keep the batteries charged with lithium-ion batteries or lithium polymer batteries. It's best to let them discharge at least most of the way before charging them back up. Sometimes, like older NiCads can get like a memory, die off. But one thing you need to do is get a multimeter and learn how to use it. Jacob, you're gonna say?
I'm gonna add something to that care of your batteries and whatnot. Only charge your batteries when they're getting like to 10%, 5% or something, because then your battery will actually last longer.
Yeah.
It's less likely to lose charge.
Yeah, that is important. So multimeters, you can buy. I mean, they're cheap. Like you can get multimeters fairly inexpensively. Don't get them too inexpensively because then they can break or not be accurate. But I mean, for less than $20, you can get a pretty decent multimeter. Some of them, so Mr. Beam and I have been searching around for ones that are like in the $30, $40 range. They have some really cool add-ons like thermocouples, like that go up to like 2,000 degrees, which we need one for that oven, so that's why we're looking at it. So there's some ones that have lots of features, but most of them measure voltage, resistance. That's pretty much what you need. And so learning how to use that is important because if you switch the positive and negative leads or try to measure something when you have it in another setting, you can break your multimeter. Usually not damage your equipment, but that's a possibility. So voltmeter measures volts. So volts being your electromotive force, that's what your voltmeter is all about. Your ohm meter, is that the next one? Measures resistance. So it measures ohms. So ohms is what we talked about, the unit of resistance. And then ammeters measure current. So it measures like amps. And so those are usually settings that you find on your multimeter, but you can also get dedicated devices to measure that. And soldering. So one thing that I really think is really good for anybody is learning to solder. So soldering pipes, like that's a skill that comes in use sometimes, especially as a
So
homeowner.
basically welding.
No, there's just soldering pipes. So
melting metal around two surfaces to melt them together.
you don't necessarily melt them together, but you do seal them.
Seal them together with melted metal.
Yes.
I
So
think I've got that down since I've got welding down.
okay. So soldering, though, when you're dealing with tiny printed circuit boards, there is one thing to keep in mind. You want to, it deals with timing, it deals with the proper amount of temperature, and it deals with heating up two different pieces of metal and then putting them together, putting the solder on, and letting that solder flow. If your solder's too cold, it doesn't get a good connection between the two, and it has like a dull grainy surface. But what you want to do is you want to heat up your metal so that the solder flows in, fills all the cracks, you get a really nice solid connection, and you won't have to deal with it again. But if you get it too hot, like if you leave it on that printed circuit board, a lot of the times that the copper will come off, it will curl. You could damage components because some components don't like to be too hot. So it kind of deals with some practice, being able to put the soldering tip on there, and get it precise enough. So some soldering tips are larger, some are really fine, some only have certain temperature ranges that they're comfortable with or they crack. So this is a skill that's good to have. Like when we built the ground plane antennas in here, probably 2 months ago. Like, Tom came and brought a soldering iron that was like a 200-watt soldering iron. I never had anything that big. We had like 30 watters. So even having different sizes and capabilities of your soldering irons is important. But yeah, soldering, it's just fun. Don't breathe the smoke. So your homework next time is reading pages 65 through 89, pretty much just to the end of the book. And it deals with a lot of rules and regulations. It is definitely a page turner. Yeah. No, if you want to go to sleep, like read it. I mean, it talks about how often you have to give your call sign when doing, a long transmission. Yeah, it's important, but it actually is important because those are the things that keep you from getting your license rescinded, revoked. They did actually have a case, I think it was in Florida, where a guy was fined like $6,000 and lost his license for 10 years because he was causing willful interference in the ham radio bands. And I will tell you, if you make people who like ham radio mad that they can't do their ham radio thing, they will fine you. So there is something called direction finding. They'll put use of those directional antennas and they will find out where you live. You won't like that. So next time, bring me questions. We do have a fairly long 2 chapters there, but hopefully we will get through those in a reasonable order. And don't forget the hamstudy.org. Super good for practicing, going through those flashcards, looking at the explanations. So don't forget to check the top right or left corner of the flashcard, because then it flips it over and it gives an explanation that somebody on hamstudy.org wrote up so that you can better understand that question. Any other questions? Okay.
Ham radio bands run from where to where?
So,
You said something early on.
Oh.
about-
So like our 2-meter band, so the ham radio 2-meter band goes from 144 megahertz to 148 megahertz. And I'll give you a band, I'll give you something that looks like this later. So this is our band plans. Maybe I'll print them off and give them to you guys next time.
Last year, they had a really nice one. Talk to,
Tom?
yes.
Okay. But so yeah, if I'm transmitting at like 136, I think that might be like a aviation band. If I'm transmitting there, I'm transmitting outside my band, and that's not cool. So
144 to
148.
2 meters.
Yeah, so that's our 2-meter. Those are the allotted frequencies for us. And then we'll also talk about next time how we're secondary users on all of our bands. So if there's something that's going on, like if we're near the Mississippi River where they use some ham radio frequencies as land navigation, so like instead of having lighthouses, they have beacons and they use radio waves to communicate with those. If you're interfering with their beacons, and even though you're a ham radio operator and that's in your band, that's not cool. Don't do that. So we'll talk about that next time as well. Any other questions?
Nope.
Alrighty. So Monday the 12th, back here at 7 o'clock, and hopefully I will have talked to Tom between now and then so we can figure out when exactly we're going to meet on the 19th. Alrighty. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. Thank you.
You mentioned you're on the lids now?
Okay, end stream.